This was once one of America's great industrial centers, East St. Louis, Illinois, whose rise and fall were complex and dramatic.
America's highways offer breathtaking views and endless freedom, but not every exit leads to a welcoming destination. Tucked away across the map are seemingly ordinary places hiding dark histories, economic collapse, and extremely high crime rates. These are the 10 notoriously dangerous and eerie United States towns where locals tell travelers, "Don't even stop for gas." We're kicking off our countdown in the heart of Dixie, where a former industrial powerhouse now carries a reputation so dangerous that even the locals tell travelers to keep on driving. 10. Bessemer, Alabama. Bessemer earned the nickname the Marble City because it grew at a record pace during the height of the steel boom. Back then, the heavy smoke from the iron and steel plants was a sign of wealth and steady jobs. However, the 1980s changed the script for this town. When the steel industry collapsed, it did not just leave behind empty buildings, it left a permanent vacuum in the economy that has never been filled, and those grand old memories are now mostly covered in rust. Fast forward to 2026, and the statistics are quite overwhelming. Recent data shows that Bessemer often ranks as one of the most dangerous cities in America for its size. In fact, some reports suggest it is safer than 0% of other U.S. cities. That is a heavy label for any community to carry. When you break down the numbers, nearly 30 out of every 1,000 residents have faced some form of violent crime, and that is roughly 6 times higher than the national average. This brings us to why travelers are warned about the gas stations. And if you find yourself on 9th Avenue with a low fuel light, you might want to think twice. This specific corridor is known for carjackings, and local police have noted that many crimes originate from specific home base hubs in neighborhoods like Southside and Braswell. These areas have become centers for activity that keeps the police department on high alert around the clock. Bessemer also deals with what experts call a proximity trap. Since it sits right on the edge of Birmingham, it acts as a natural pass-through for transient crime moving between cities. The local police force is currently in a major planning phase with the International Association of Chiefs of Police.
Usually it's police officers around here sitting at the store, in the store.
They are trying to rebuild trust and safety in a community that has been stretched thin by decades of violence. Walking through downtown feels like stepping into a time capsule that has been left out in the rain. You see beautiful, historic architecture standing right next to storefronts that have been boarded up for years. It is a place where the shadows of the past are much larger than the reality of the present. While Bessemer fights to reclaim its former glory, the current reality remains a warning to anyone with an empty tank. As we leave the heavy iron gates of Alabama behind, our next stop takes us to the edge of the Florida Everglades, where the end of the road can lead to a very dangerous beginning. 9. Florida City, Florida. Florida City is essentially the last stop before you hit the long, lonely bridges of the Keys. If you are driving south on the turnpike, your GPS and your gas gauge will both tell you to pull over here. Normally, this place looks like a tropical paradise with palm trees and sun-drenched gas stations. But for thousands of travelers every year, this town turns out to be a trap. It is a place where the vacation vibes end abruptly, replaced by a reality that travel brochures never mention. The town sits right at a major crossroads.
When people think of Florida, they often imagine sunshine, amusement parks, orange groves, and alligators.
Which is exactly why it has a target on its back. Because it connects Miami to the rest of the state, it has become a favorite transit point for substance traffickers and criminal groups. You can literally stand on the sidewalk and watch the inequality pass you by. On one side, you have luxury SUVs filled with tourists heading to 5-star resorts. On the other side, you have a local community struggling with some of the deepest poverty in Florida. This massive gap between the haves and the have-nots creates a perfect storm for crime. Now, when we look at the 2025 and 2026 crime data, the numbers are honestly hard to believe. While the rest of Florida is actually getting safer, Florida City is moving in the opposite direction. If you spend enough time here, the odds of becoming a victim of a crime are about 1 in 38. That is a huge statistic. At local gas stations, criminals have mastered the distraction theft. They wait for you to get out of your car, check your phone, or fumble with a map, and in the few seconds it takes to start the pump, your bag or wallet can vanish from your passenger seat. The locals in nearby Homestead will tell you the same thing they post on travel forums. Do not stop. They call it the keep moving rule. It does not matter how nice the weather is or how bright the neon signs shine. The risk of a smash and grab or a confrontation is just too high. Most experienced travelers in South Florida know to fuel up 30 miles north or just keep driving until they see the ocean. 8. East St. Louis, Illinois. Crossing the bridge from the bright lights of St. Louis, Missouri, into East St. Louis feels like entering a different world entirely. This city was once a powerhouse of American industry, filled with meatpacking plants and busy docks along the Mississippi River. But those days are long gone. Today, East St. Louis is often brought up in national conversations for all the wrong reasons. It has a reputation so heavy that even navigation apps sometimes suggest routes that avoid the city center entirely. The statistics of the crime rates here even tell a story that is hard to hear. For years, this town has topped the charts for the highest murder rate per capita in the United States. Even as we move through 2026, the violence remains a stubborn shadow over the community. When people talk about a city in permanent crisis, they are looking at East St. Louis. The infrastructure has collapsed so completely that many streetlights do not work, and some roads are so cracked they are barely drivable. This creates an eerie atmosphere at night that makes a simple stop for gas feel like a scene from a thriller movie. Locals and police often point to specific neighborhoods like Lansdowne and Winstanley as the most dangerous spots for outsiders. These are the areas where the lack of resources is most visible. The police department has been hit with every hurdle imaginable, from budget cuts to severe understaffing. This means if you find yourself in trouble, help might not arrive as quickly as you expect. It is a place where you truly have to look out for yourself. The visual of the city is what really sticks with you. You can see the skeletal remains of old aluminum works and industrial ghosts that used to provide thousands of jobs. Now, those empty shells are surrounded by illegal dumping sites and overgrown lots. It creates a sense of lawlessness, where there simply are not enough eyes on the street to keep things in check. The general consensus among those who live nearby is very straightforward. If you do not have a specific reason to be there, do not get off the highway. While the urban decay here is a result of decades of struggle, our next stop shows us a different kind of decline. We are heading to a place where the steel mills once promised a lifetime of security, but now the only thing they leave behind is a skyline of broken windows and empty promises. 7. Gary, Indiana. If you have ever driven around the southern tip of Lake Michigan on your way to Chicago, you have probably seen the massive industrial skyline of Gary, Indiana. At one point, this city was the crown jewel of the American dream. It was built from scratch by U.S. Steel to be the ultimate company town. For decades, it was a place where a high school diploma could get you a middle-class life and a pension. But when the steel industry started downsizing in the late 20th century, the floor fell out from under the city. Gary went from a booming metropolis to a place that feels like it is being reclaimed by nature and silence. Today, Gary is often called the Silent City.
In the last video, I introduced you to Jim, who showed us and talked to us about some of the more notable sites in and around downtown Gary.
It is famous for its ruin porn aesthetic, with thousands of abandoned buildings, including the hauntingly beautiful City Methodist Church. While photographers love these sites, they are a major safety concern for everyone else. These empty structures provide a lot of cover for illegal activity. In 2026, Gary still sits in the top 20 most dangerous cities in the United States. Even with a much smaller population than it used to have, the violence remains high. Statistics show that you have about a 1 in 118 chance of being a victim of a violent crime here. The real danger for travelers usually happens along the E90 road. Local reports often mention watchers at gas stations near the highway exits. These are individuals who scope out vehicles that look like they belong to outsiders. They look for out-of-state plates or cars filled with luggage. Because the city has such a limited tax base, the police and fire departments are stretched incredibly thin. If you run into trouble at a pump, the response time might be much longer than what you are used to in the suburbs. It has gotten to the point where some navigation apps will actually suggest routes that go completely around the city limits to avoid high-crime intersections. While there have been a few small attempts to bring new businesses into the area, the reality on the ground has not changed much for the average person passing through. The general rule for anyone on a road trip through Indiana is to fuel up in a neighboring town like Hammond or Portage. Gary is a place that shows us how quickly an empire can crumble, leaving only ghosts behind. 6. Muskegon Heights, Michigan. A lot of people get confused when they see Muskegon Heights on a map. They assume it is just a neighborhood of the larger city of Muskegon, which is famous for its beautiful lakeside parks and summer festivals. However, Muskegon Heights is its own separate city, and the difference between the two is night and day. While the main city has seen a bit of a comeback, the Heights has been stuck in a cycle of poverty and crime for decades. It is a pocket of extreme hardship that often catches travelers off guard. Even though it is a small town with only a few thousand people, the violence here is intense. In fact, the crime rates in Muskegon Heights often rival much larger cities like Detroit or Flint. The reason for this often comes down to the substance epidemic. The opioid and meth crises have hit this part of Michigan so hard. You see, when you have a small area where many people are struggling with addiction and there are very few jobs, it creates a high-pressure environment.
Still very much an active scene. Police were initially in the 600 block of Ivory Avenue. That's where the shooting took place, but
this is why you see such high numbers for robberies and aggravated assaults. At the start of 2026, the police force was dealing with a serious recruiting crisis. It is hard to keep officers on the job when the work is so dangerous and the pay is low compared to other neighboring towns. This means that at any given time, there might only be a couple of officers patrolling the entire city. And for a traveler, this is a major red flag. The layout of the town also makes it a bit of a trap. It is very easy to accidentally exit the highway and wind up in a high-risk neighborhood before you even realize you have left the main road. Once you are there, the visual signs of neglect are everywhere. You will see boarded-up convenience stores and groups of people hanging out on corners in the middle of the day. While there are local activists and community leaders working incredibly hard to reclaim their streets, the reality for a visitor remains the same. The best advice is to keep your doors locked and wait until you reach the next town over to stop for snacks or fuel. Economic collapse does not always look like a busy city falling apart. Sometimes, it looks like a place that has been completely forgotten by time. And our fifth stop takes us to a town sitting right where two massive rivers meet, but even all that water could not wash away its troubled past. 5. Cairo, Illinois. If you look at the U.S. map, Cairo, Illinois seems like it should be one of the most important cities in the country because it sits at the exact point where the massive Ohio and Mississippi rivers collide. Well, back in the day, people thought this town was destined to become the next Chicago.
Because there were no bridges, like that one you see right there. So when people needed to cross the Ohio and the Mississippi,
it was so strategically important that even Ulysses S. Grant used it as a headquarters during the Civil War. However, Cairo is a classic example of a strategic failure. Instead of becoming a major hub, the world simply built bridges and railroads that bypassed it entirely. What was left behind is a town that has been in a slow, painful freefall for over a century. The population in Cairo, Illinois, is somehow very shocking. In 1920, around 15,000 people lived here, but by 2026, That number had shriveled to roughly 1,400. This is not just a quiet town. It is a place that is gradually disappearing. And a major reason for this decline was the deep racial divide that tore the community apart in the 1960s. For years, Cairo was a literal war zone, with boycotts, snipers, and a vigilante group known as the White Hats. The violence was so bad that a massive number of residents fled and never looked back. This left the city with a zero tax base. In fact, Cairo has no city sales tax because there is almost no commerce left to tax. For a traveler, Cairo is the ultimate ghost town warning. If you are driving through the southernmost tip of Illinois, you might think a town at such a famous river junction would have plenty of services. But the reality is that there are currently no functioning gas stations within the city limits. If your tank is low, you are out of luck. The visual decay here is haunting. You can drive past grand Victorian mansions that are literally being swallowed by vines and trees.
Now that we've seen the main road, we're going to take you inside the coolest abandoned places here in Cairo.
The downtown area looks like a movie set for an apocalypse, with beautiful brick buildings standing empty and silent. Actually, there is a deep fear of the unknown when you visit Cairo. Because the population is so small and the infrastructure is so broken, the town feels lawless. There are no crowds and no safety in numbers. It is a place where you can feel the weight of history in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable. To crown it all, Cairo is the perfect example of what happens when a city loses its pulse. As we leave the riverbanks behind, let's head toward a different kind of danger in the open plains, where the hills hold secrets that are just as dark. 4. Stilwell, Oklahoma. Deep in the Ozark foothills of eastern Oklahoma, you will find a town called Stilwell. This town is proudly called the strawberry capital of the world.
Thousands of people gathered today to celebrate the 75th annual Stilwell Strawberry Festival.
And every May, they host a massive festival celebrating that title. When you hear it, it sounds like a slice of pure Americana. But if you look past the festival posters and the crates of fruit, you'll find a town that has earned a much more grim nickname, the early death capital of the U.S. The data coming out of Stilwell in 2026 furthers a tragic trend. In some neighborhoods here, the average life expectancy has dipped as low as 56 years, a number that looks more like a war zone than a small town in Middle America. A huge part of this is driven by the methamphetamine epidemic that has gripped this region for years. You know, Stilwell sits near the Arkansas border, making it a key transit point for substance carriers moving product through the rural backwoods. When poverty is high and hope is low, the drug trade moves in and stays, creating a cycle of violence that the local police are constantly fighting to contain. Even though it's a small town, the odds of running into trouble here are surprisingly high. Statistics from the last few years show a roughly 1 in 29 chance of being a victim of crime if you linger too long. Because the town is so remote, there is a small-town silence that can be very intimidating for outsiders. Locals know who belongs and who doesn't. If you stop at a local gas station, you might notice that same watched feeling we saw in Gary or Florida City. It is common for local law enforcement to warn travelers about property theft, specifically people waiting for a car with out-of-state plates to be left unattended for even a minute. From another angle, the irony of Stilwell is the most haunting part. You have these beautiful rolling hills and a community that values its history, but it is all overshadowed by a crushing economic reality. It is a place that shows how a single crisis, like the meth epidemic, can take a beautiful town and turn it into a high-risk zone for anyone just passing through. While we move from the rural badlands of Oklahoma toward the industrial heart of the South, we find a city that was once the steel capital of its region, but now struggles with a crime rate that has become legendary for all the wrong reasons. 3. Miami, Arizona. Most people hear the name Miami and immediately think of neon lights, palm trees, and expensive cars in Florida. However, this is Miami, Arizona, and it is a world away from the beach. This town evolved during the massive copper boom of the early 1900s. Back then, the mountains were filled with miners who thought the wealth would never run out. However, it got to a point where the mines finally went out, leaving behind a skeleton crew of a population and a landscape that looks more like a post-apocalyptic movie than a vacation spot. The isolation of this place is part of what makes it so dangerous. Miami is tucked into rugged, high desert terrain where the sun is brutal and the ground is unforgiving. If your car breaks down or you run into trouble here, you are in a life-threatening situation almost instantly. The environment itself carries a heavy shadow because of its status as a Superfund site. Decades of mining left the soil and water contaminated with heavy metals, giving the entire town a decayed and gray feeling. It is a place where the earth itself feels like it is struggling to recover. When you look at the 2025 and 2026 Mr. State reports, the statistics for this tiny town are alarming. Despite having fewer than 2,000 residents, Miami ranks as one of the most violent small towns in the United States. The crime index remains significantly higher than the national average, which is a rare and scary thing for such a small community. Most of this activity happens along a place called Overtown. This is a street road through town, and it has very few eyes on the street. It is one of the most dangerous places for quick robberies and easy targets for students and young professionals. Also, the visual vibe of Miami is one of pure desperation. You will see rusted mining machinery towering over sun-bleached houses and storefronts that have not been opened in decades. And there is a very strong outsiders are not welcomed energy that hits you the moment you step out of your car. Local lore is filled with stories from travelers who stopped for a quick break and felt like they were being watched from the dark shadows of the abandoned mining shafts that dot the hillsides. It is the kind of place where you do your best to keep your eyes on the road and your foot on the gas. Number 2. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. If you head deep into the Arkansas Delta, you will find Pine Bluff. This city was once the absolute crown jewel of the South's cotton empire. Back in its glory days, the river port and the railroads were buzzing with life. It was a place where people from all over the country came to build a future and find their greener pastures. However, as the world evolved and the cotton economy collapsed, the city started to crumble from the inside out. Today, Pine Bluff is one of the fastest shrinking cities in America. It is a place that feels like it is being slowly swallowed up by the landscape, leaving a community to struggle in the massive shadow of what it used to be. The reputation of this town is so heavy that people in the surrounding areas have come up with a dark nickname for it: Don't Bluff. It sounds like a clever play on words, but the meaning is dead serious. The message is giving, do not test people here. With some of the highest homicide and assault rates in the country, the warning is not an exaggeration. This is not just a bunch of scary numbers on the internet. It is the reality of a city that has lost its middle class. When the money left, it left a vacuum that was quickly filled by territorial disputes and high-tension neighborhoods where everyone is just trying to survive the day. If you are driving down I-53, you might notice that seasoned truckers almost never pull off the highway here. They follow what is known as the traveling man's rule, which basically says you do not stop in Pine Bluff for fuel unless it is a total emergency. Even then, the rule is to never leave your vehicle unlocked for even a second. The city has become a major hub for property crime. It is the kind of place where a smash and grab can happen in the blink of an eye while you are standing right there at the pump. When you look around, the warning signs are hard to miss. You will see entire blocks of boarded-up houses, lots overgrown with weeds, and heavy private security guarding the few businesses that are still open. What makes it even scarier is that when you look at the actual data for 2026, Pine Bluff is often more dangerous per person than much bigger cities like Little Rock. The local police department is fighting a battle they are barely equipped for. They deal with constant understaffing and have to rely on the Arkansas State Police just to keep things from spiraling out of control. It is a textbook case of brain drain, where most people with the means to leave have already moved away. This leaves the city in a vulnerable state, and it means that if you are just passing through, you are a much bigger target than you might realize. Now, our final stop brings us back to a city that has become synonymous with the struggle for survival, a place that is fighting to change but remains a warning story for any traveler. 1. Camden, New Jersey. Just across the Delaware River from the towering skyscrapers of Philadelphia sits Camden, New Jersey.
Camden, New Jersey. Camden is located across the Delaware River from Philadelphia.
For decades, this city was the name that always seemed to be at the very top of every most dangerous cities list in America. It was once a powerhouse of American industry, home to massive companies like Campbell's Soup and the New York Shipbuilding Corporation. During its peak, Camden was a place of opportunity and pride. But when the factories closed their doors and the jobs vanished, the city went into a tailspin that lasted for generations. It became a symbol of urban decay, where the streets were controlled more by the hard substance trade than by the law. If you are driving through Camden in 2026, you will see a city that is in the middle of a very intense and complicated comeback. A few years ago, the city made national headlines for completely disbanding its police force and starting over from scratch with a focus on community policing. While this has helped drop the homicide rate significantly from its record-breaking highs, the reality for a traveler is still very high risk. The gas station experience here is a perfect example of why you still need to be careful. Most stations are built like fortresses, with heavy bulletproof glass and strict rules about paying before you even touch the pump. The danger in Camden is all about where you choose to turn, because this city still currently struggles with a massive property crime problem. Statistics show that theft and car break-ins happen at a rate that would shock most suburban residents. It is the kind of place where leaving a bag on your passenger seat for 5 minutes is almost a guarantee that your window will be broken when you get back. While the downtown area near the waterfront has seen a lot of new investment and looks quite modern, you only have to drive a few blocks in the wrong direction to find yourself in a no-go zone. These are the neighborhoods where the drug trade is still a primary economy and where outsiders are spotted the moment they enter the area. For many years, the advice for travelers was to not get off the highway. But then, even though things are improving, many seasoned commuters still follow that rule. The gap between the new Camden and the old Camden is still very wide. It is a city that is fighting with everything it has to rewrite its story. But for the average person passing through, the risks remain high. It definitely shows that even when a city starts to heal, the scars of the past take a very long time to fade. Camden is a place of incredible resilience, but it is also a place where you should always keep your doors locked and your eyes on the road. At the end of the day, history leaves scars, and in these towns, those scars are still wide open. But then, have you ever driven through any of these unsettling towns, or know of another place we missed? Drop your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.